We're back with the Crypto Mavericks, and we have a great guest here for you today. I was pretty excited to know that we're going to have Rennick Palley back on. Well, not back on our podcast. I've spoken with Rennick in the past in our crypto summits. He knows the Crypto 101 guys really well. Just a wealth of knowledge in the space. Always has a great take. Love to kind of just pick his brain a little bit. But again, he's the founder of Stratos. Rennick, really happy to have you on today, man.
Good to be here. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you again. And I was trying to think. It was a crypto summit, probably it was months ago, and there's been a lot that's happened in the market in those past few months. It's probably too much to even just talk about in just a podcast episode. But before we jump into that, I would love to know a little bit about your background. You can introduce yourself to our audience, and of course, talk a little bit about Stratus.
Cool. Yeah. So I started my career working at a TradFi hedge fund. Started Stratos in 2016, and I've been investing in liquid crypto and crypto venture since then. At Stratos, we've got four investment funds, three early stage venture funds focused on crypto, and a liquid hedge fund also focused on crypto.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know you've had some great epic calls ever since our crypto summit discussion. I just love to talk so much. I've kind of been keeping a close tab on some of your moves, talking with some people in the industry, and it's been exciting stuff. Before we get into some of those calls, I would love to know a little bit about just your thoughts of this current administration. We're getting a lot of interesting news recently, like the Genius Act and stablecoins. We had just as of last night, we had Trump having a crypto dinner. We have Bitcoin literally hitting all-time highs. It's been an exciting time. What's your overall vibe right now?
Yeah, there's a few things there. So I think from a just macro perspective, obviously we had the whole tariff tantrum. We have global liquidity at all-time highs, and then we have the regulatory side of things that have improved massively. So three different kind of parallel things that are driving crypto in my view right now. Um, you know, just to summarize the tariff tantrum, I mean, obviously everyone lived through that. There are a couple of key things in my mind that happened throughout that. I think the first thing was it became clear who's really in charge of the markets. And it's not the president, it's not any one government, it's primarily the bond market, in the sense that if bond market investors really protest what the US government or any other government for that matter, in the case of Bank of England a few years ago, it can basically derail any sort of political motives that may be at hand. And the reason for that is we're in late stage fiat world. Now, does that mean fiat ends in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? It's hard to say. I think we can kind of kick this can down the road for a long time. But at the end of the day, the US has $36 trillion of debt going to 40 trillion in the next year or so, just based on deficits. You cannot continue to finance that level of debt with very high interest rates. And as soon as Trump, as the market started melting down and the 10 years started going towards a 5% yield, that's when some of the Fed governors came out, Besson came out, people started basically saying, whoa, we're going to calm down the markets. We're going to have your back with liquidity. And that was really, the peak of 10-year yields, the peak of bond market volatility, the lows of equities all kind of coincided with a pivot on the tariff agenda. Um, and look, I don't think that the current administration is wrong in wanting to get the current account deficit down. The trade deficit, which is the biggest part of that, really driving a current account deficit, which we can talk more about. But at the end of the day, it's the markets that decide what happened. And I think that in our mind, running the liquid hedge fund, we said, this is the bottom. We had come into the month with a lot of cash. We basically went all in at that point. Spot Bitcoin calls, and a lot of Fartcoin. And so that turned out very well. We've basically been riding most of those positions up until today. Um, so I think that was a really important piece of information to really be aware of, because I think the regime has really changed since 2008. That was the first time that the Fed really stepped up and said, okay, we're going to not only backstop banks, but we're going to backstop all the critical markets. And since then, every time there's been an event like the tariff tantrum, like COVID, like SVB failing, like, the 2019, there was a repo panic. The Fed comes in at the last minute and saves things. And so if you're kind of tuned into that, you can essentially find the bottom, if you're headed in that direction. And so that's, I think a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of talking heads on TV, people in my group chats were acting like the world was going to end and basically panic selling the bottom. And I think there is reasons to think that things could get worse. But when, at least from a macro perspective or a geopolitical perspective, but again, thinking about things from the perspective of how much debt there is and how markets work, it was just a matter of time before things turned around. And so I think that's kind of the big thing. There's basically, like in poker, there's a tell. You can look for these things that happen in the market, and liquidity has to be injected somehow or another to bring things back, because the way that the world is so heavily financialized now, there's so much debt, it just cannot sustain this. And that's what I mean by we're late stage fiat, right? Basically, the system doesn't work like a traditional economic capitalistic system anymore. And the more you're paying attention to that, most people in crypto, I think, are paying attention to that idea. But you can use that to your advantage in terms of trading and timing markets. So I know that was a long rant, but I'll stop there, and maybe we can move on to my other points later.
Yeah, I mean, great points. It was a fabulous breakdown and very aligned in a lot of the same views. And it was just a great call by you to load up on Bitcoin. And we'll talk a little bit about Fartcoin, because it is a ridiculous story behind it, ridiculous meme coin, but I remember identifying it pretty early myself and just saw that it had traction. What really made you, because it was early, what made you kind of gravitate towards that meme coin in particular with the market turning around? What drove those factors? Was it more technical analysis? Was it more fundamentals? Would love to know a little bit about your thought process.
I just felt very philosophically aligned with the community that Dip Wheeler has built.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kidding. I mean,
Oh
partially,
partially.
that's partially true, but we'd been watching it. There are a couple of really interesting things happening. One was that if you had been following all of the meme coins, from the January, February peak through, late March, early April, Fartcoin bottomed first and started making higher lows first. In addition to that, Fartcoin's ratio of trading volume to market cap was far beyond any other. And then the holder count was steadily increasing, the unique wallets. And so we were and then its attention level using some of the data services that we use was very strong on a relative basis, especially on a market cap weighted basis. So looking at all those things, we're like, we've got to take a position here. This clearly is the strongest meme based on all of these fundamentals. It's also great because it's very relatable, right? Like you say anyone, hey, we made millions on Fartcoin, they're gonna laugh, right? It's like the best. It's like Cum Rocket or something from last cycle. It's better than Doge or Shiba, because if you think about memes as partially like a tongue-in-cheek like nod to TradFi, Fartcoin, it doesn't get any better. And you look at all these TradFi commentators, whenever the market's pumping, they're always talking about Fartcoin, like how ridiculous Fartcoin, oh my God, what is it today? 1.5 billion market cap. So we liked all of those aspects of it. It's like free marketing for our bags. And it actually leads into another viewpoint that we have, which is, the Raoul Pal Michael Howell view of the world that essentially, and I was explaining this earlier, our financial system now is constantly at the brink of collapse, and liquidity is there to keep it from collapsing. And if you watch the global liquidity metrics, you can kind of see that crypto trades at like a 12-week lag to those liquidity metrics. And if you look at it, liquidity peaked in like December. I think it was, what was it? Late Q4. And that's what caused basically the huge sell-off in March, you could argue. And so then if you kept looking at the data, you could see that things inflected and were coming back up after the December sell-off. And you could look at the lag and say things should be recovering in late Q1, early Q2. And that's exactly what happened. And so it's kind of funny. The market was ascribing all of these narratives to why the market was selling off and, oh, the world is ending and all that stuff. But if you paid attention, didn't read a single headline, didn't go on Twitter a single time, and all you had was a chart of the liquidity and Bitcoin or alts, it would have explained the whole move. Now, I'm not saying that that's all of it, right? I think it's maybe a little bit too reductive to say it's just that. But that was a big part of it. And obviously, narratives kind of feed off of price action, and then price action feeds off of the narrative. So there's some reflexivity there. But what was interesting is Fartcoin was the only thing that was starting to move positively and make higher lows. Bitcoin was still falling. Everyone, was still scared. And we're looking at this and we're like, is Fartcoin the ultimate liquidity barometer? I still think it is, honestly. I mean, just look at the chart, look at liquidity, look at every other asset. So that also gave us a lot of conviction that it was going to lead to the upside. And that's what happened.
Rennick, I could just listen to you all day, or probably at nighttime so I can fall asleep. But you're so, calming voice, and I'm not sure if someone's told you that, but amazing. Great insight. I had some boring questions about policy, but I'm going to scrap that. I'm in San Francisco, the Bay Area. To talk about AI is just, front and centered. Have you guys made investments into there, or is it just too early? Just thoughts about AI, crypto overall. It seems to be a good fit, AI and crypto. Just thoughts on that.
Definitely. Yes, we've been making AI investments that merge crypto for years. We've been bullish on AI for a long time. What I would say, though, is I think probably the best way to play AI is by owning Bitcoin. And let me explain. I don't think this is a controversial take, but I think it's an example of one where it's very easy to mid-curve this. And the left curve view of just owning Bitcoin, I think, makes a lot of sense if you want to get long AI. So what are the options today? In TradFi, you've got the Mag 7. You've got all the private AI companies, the open AIs of the world. And then you have some crypto options, but most of the crypto options are like the launch pads and the AI 16Zs and the virtuals of the world and stuff. And, I think, and then you've got, I guess different kinds of TradFi, the infrastructure plays like NVIDIA and CoreWeave. So I think there's merit to investing in all of those things. What the problem with all those things is they all have execution risk and competition. Bitcoin is the most pure play because, in my view, AI is going to basically accelerate the need to have some form of universal basic income. Because a lot of people are going to become unemployed or underemployed because of that. I think on net, AI is actually going to create more productivity and more jobs. So I think it's bullish, but I think there's going to be a lot of turnover in jobs, and that's going to require basically more money printing. And the best asset to own, if you have a view on money printing, is Bitcoin. And it has no competition really, other than gold, arguably. And I think it's vastly better asset than gold. It has no execution risk. It just is what it is. Right. So it's going to continue to be the single thing that benefits most from money printing. I think there's an extremely high probability that AI accelerates money printing. And it's possible that all of these other businesses just end up competing with each other on a race to the bottom. Because I just don't think that the expected return of the Mag 7 is that high. They're going to keep making money. It's going to be a good investment, but it may be 10 to 20% annualized returns, which, by the way, still are great. But I think Bitcoin is going to be much higher than that. And it's one asset. You've got to trade Mag 7 and all these other things and try and constantly analyze what the competitive risks are. I mean, for example, if you look at Apple, I think there's a good reason to believe that there's significant competitive risk to them now. They're behind on AI. I'm sure you guys saw the news that OpenAI just acqui-hired Jony Ive. And, he's arguably, why do people use iPhones? Because it's a beautiful device, has a really good UX. And there's no reason why that couldn't potentially be replicated, especially if an LLM-based interface ends up becoming the future of using devices, which I think there's a good reason to believe that's the case. And so you could see Apple really being damaged by that. It could end up being the BlackBerry moment for Apple. We'll see.
Yikes. Yeah, you brought up OpenAI, and just curious about them overall, because they do have a blockchain, WorldCoin, looking to help the world's largest identity and financial network, supposedly. Any thoughts on that? Because they just seemingly are on a fundraising tier, right? They're looking to raise $1 trillion from the UAE, I think I've heard, and they have some crazy valuation now. Just thoughts on Sam Altman and what he's doing in the crazy world of blockchain.
I think one of the reasons why they're acting so aggressively is because they know that the model business is a really hard one to have any significant long-term competitive moat in. And so they need to build their own data centers. They need to build their own devices. They need to do more things that differentiate them competitively. Because I think otherwise they are in a tough competitive position versus, let's say, Google or Microsoft, because both of those companies, I mean, obviously they have an arrangement with Microsoft, but all those other companies own the customer. It's much easier just to put a model in front of them. I think once Google wakes up and realizes that they just need to put LLM interfaces on all of their Google Workspace apps instead of having it as kind of like a sideshow, it makes one wonder, like, why would you ever click away to a separate OpenAI tab or whatever when you can just use it directly in whatever Google product you're using? So I think that kind of drives their activity here. WorldCoin, it's an interesting one. I mean, in order to be really bullish on WorldCoin, other than just as like a short-term trade, you have to kind of believe in a somewhat dystopian future where, like, some really centralized third-party company is the arbiter of identity globally. That's kind of scary. I'm not saying it's not likely, by the way. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of the possibility that company envisions. Do I think it's likely to succeed? I'm not really sure. I feel like my odds of that succeeding might have been higher before the last presidential election. I just kind of sense a vibe shift of people being much more skeptical of these institutions, large institutions like the World Economic Forums of the world, etc. So yeah, we'll see. But I don't necessarily have a strong view on it, other than that the FDV is just really high. It's not something that we probably would touch.
I'm not lining up to get my eyes scanned anytime soon for $50 in WorldCoin. I'll tell you that much. Whenever that was happening,
Exactly.
I was like, eh.
Exactly.
I have similar feelings to exactly what you said. Really, really well said. And I need to call something out here. You were kind of talking a little down on BlackBerry, but the BlackBerry back in the day was my go-to BBM messenger. I never thought anything would ever topple it. So I used to go on MySpace all the time on BlackBerry, and both of them went down hard.
Yeah, I mean, it was great in the day. And then, I remember when the iPhone came out, everyone's like, oh, this thing's a piece of shit. What do I need this thing for? I hate this screen. I want actual physical buttons. It's never going to work. And now today, what, like 12 years later, is not, it's a joke. So I think that's one of the things to keep in mind, that these things can be disrupted.
No, it's
So
a
I don't think
excellent
that
point.
Apple's position is unassailable.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I was one of the people. I was like, I can't do this without a mini keyboard. Now I'm just like, it's just an excellent point. A great analogy of how things can change so quickly. And then when we talk about the world of Web3, we talk about crypto, we talk about AI. We're on a fast track in one direction or the other. I would love
Totally.
to know. I'd love to know a little bit. We talked about AI. We're talking about the macro. We have tons of things we could talk about, but I'm curious about your thoughts and Stratus' thoughts on gaming. Do you see a path where blockchain and gaming still kind of get into a hype cycle and actually put real case utility, or do you think that could lag behind some of these other sectors that seem to be catching attention?
So I'll caveat this by saying we, as a firm, don't invest in gaming. We view gaming as kind of like a subcategory of entertainment broadly, and entertainment is a hits business. And it's something that requires, I think, a different skill set to be successful at picking those hits than our other types of investments. So we've kind of just said, you know what, we're just not going to go here. Now, in terms of like gaming and crypto, I think this idea that you're going to have some fully decentralized on-chain game that lives completely on the blockchain and uses decentralized validators to run the gameplay, I don't really see that. You know, maybe at some point in the future, but I don't think of that as being like a really killer use case. I do think like poker using things like FHE, is helpful because, then you can run it on chain in a trustless way, that, everyone can feel safe that, there's no cheating going on in the background. So I think that's cool. I don't think that's really like a huge, world changing use case. But I also know that Grand Theft Auto 6 apparently is going to be using crypto in game. And so I think that is really the kind of end state here, where basically all of your in-game purchases and activity is denominated in some on-chain asset. That I think is very real. And I think it's kind of just along the lines of like the overall stablecoin narrative right now, which is like, it's not going to take very long for everything we do online to be a stablecoin payment, as opposed to, a Stripe internet payment rail built on top of the fiat system. And I think gaming will be a part of that.
I mean, I would imagine you're probably of the belief that we're going to be using stable coins in the next 2 to 3 years to buy a cup of coffee. I mean, that we've always talked about that, but you think that's legit on the table? That's happening?
100%. I mean, it's hard to say what exactly the timeline is, but I think it's going to happen fast. And I think there are three really big enablers there. One is the Genius Bill, which finally got passed, which is amazing. Like, the user experience of stablecoins is vastly better than fiat. The thing that's been the major barrier to global adoption of stablecoins has been all the tether FUD and people thinking like, is this really a dollar? What is this? Now with the Genius Bill, it's going to become clear, like, okay, I can trust this thing as if it was actually a dollar. And then people will have no doubt. And then it will be used, and then all of the benefits will be there and none of the downsides. That's I think where we're at now. I think there are two really interesting like forcing functions there for adoption though. One is just the global adoption of Apple Pay. So I don't know what your guys' experience with it was, but I remember when it came out, I think it was like 2014, 2015, 2016 time frame. And if you looked at the data, the uptake was fairly slow, but once people started using it, it was extremely sticky. And most payments type applications are like that. So now that has happened and there's pretty solid penetration of Apple Pay, it's literally a simple over-the-air update you wouldn't even notice to be able to use a stablecoin for your Apple Pay and not have to use. Today, you can do it using like a Visa debit card that draws on one of your wallets, but just completely disintermediating Visa altogether and using a stablecoin if the point of sale also has, and I think that's going to happen quickly too. So the wildfire potential is there. And then the last thing I would say is, and this is probably the most interesting thing that has happened in the last couple months with respect to stablecoins, is literally the chairman of the Treasury, Bessent, is saying we need stablecoins to buy our bags. Like, they literally need stablecoin adoption to go from 200 billion to 2 trillion as a means to help actually buy some of the Treasury debt that's being issued, especially since Bessent has continued to lean hard on issuing bills instead of longer dated bonds. And stablecoins are a great place to absorb a lot of those bills. So it's pretty wild that the US government is now looking to crypto to buy their bags. Like, that's crazy. I don't think the significance of that can be understated.
I had a question on stablecoins. Is that something that, as a company, you guys are looking at? There's so many out there. I guess for the average person, it wouldn't matter. With the Genius Act, hopefully that protects the consumers. But there's been scares before with like dynamic stablecoins. There's so many out there these days. How do you guys look at it as an investment one first, if it is, and then as consumers, is there anything to watch out for on our end?
Yeah, so I think that it's going to end up basically being a duopoly business, as it is today. There's Circle and there's Tether, and then there's everything else. And I think some stable coins will exist that are specific to certain applications. The app kind of forces you to use that stable coin, but otherwise, I don't think there's going to be significant adoption of others. And I think, regulations like this, one of the downsides is it does create kind of regulatory capture and king making. And I think that's very likely to happen with Circle and Tether. So those are going to be the ones I think that most people end up using. In terms of how we invest, I think that, as I just said, it's going to be very, very hard for a new stablecoin to really break out and compete. I think the network effects of money are extremely strong. Circle and Tether already have it. So I think for us, when we think about getting exposure to stable coins, it's mainly, what applications are going to be enabled by this, or what blockchains are actually benefiting from this use case. And in our view, those things generally already exist, at least the blockchains. Like, I wouldn't really be that excited about someone coming to me and saying, hey, we built a new L1 that is specific for stablecoins. Like, what's the real need to have a new L1 for that? Again, it's like the network effect type things. And I think that actually kind of brings up the discussion around ETH, which, ETH today still is the leader in stablecoins. And I think if we really get things taking off with stablecoins, I think ETH can really benefit from that, especially since the sentiment is so negative. If things start turning around, which it seems like they're starting to, I think we could, a big ETH rally could be in store.
I love the ETH rally call. I mean, I don't have as much ETH as I had years ago and when it was at all-time highs, but I do have my own suspicions that ETH gets 3,000 north, and then we start to see some really interesting ETH memes pop off personally, like the Pepes, the Mogs, the SPX 6900s. I think they could have a very interesting rally if we catch a strong Ethereum bid over the next few weeks.
They already have.
Yeah.
We own 2 of 3 of those in the fund. We've owned them since early April.
Yeah, I knew you guys would have. I mean, you've been on it on every call that we've had. I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge, and that's why I urge anybody to absolutely check out what you're building at Stratus, or what you build at Stratus and your firm. Before, my last question for you is kind of one that you hear everywhere. Your retail friend will ask you every day, but it's fun to talk about. What's kind of the outlook here for Bitcoin? Do you have like a gut feeling? Not gonna hold you to this, but every one of my friends now is asking me, are we going straight to $1.25, $1.50? Are we actually hitting these Cathie Wood predictions in 2030? I'm just curious about your overall thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our view is we kind of chop around here for a little bit, and then we wind up in, the mid 120s sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Could happen a lot faster than that. But that's kind of like the outside date of that, so fairly imminent. And this is kind of the consensus view, but something like 150 this year, by the end of the year. Which given how quickly Bitcoin moves, I think it's very possible we can get there. I think the things to think about when it comes to Bitcoin really making significant new highs is every time you get to a new level in Bitcoin, especially like another $10,000 level, there are new sellers that come out who are Bitcoin OGs and major holders. And they're basically like, look, I'm going to upgrade my lifestyle. I'm going to sell some Bitcoin. And that's what causes us to kind of hit a major level, stop, retrace a little bit, kind of chop around that level, eat through all that sell demand, and then get to the next level. And then you kind of do the same thing. And I think we're kind of there now at 110, 111. We're going to do that for a little bit, chew through that, and then basically teleport to the next level that's psychologically significant for these people. And then we'll do the same thing at 120 and then eventually get to 150. And, it's just a question of how many new buyers are there out there to buy that supply from those long-term sellers? And then how long does that process take before ultimately liquidity starts turning down and we get kind of like a cycle top for the year? So yeah, I think all of these SPAC and pipe plays, these meta planets of the world, the new kind of micro strategies are all new sources of demand for Bitcoin, which is great. If that continues to catch on, those kinds of things are what help drive Bitcoin much higher. So far, so good. The momentum is there. As long as the market stays strong and liquidity is there, I think we're going to keep seeing new highs this year.
I love to hear that. I think we'd all be very excited with that prediction coming true. And you're right. There's a ton of different companies. Every day I wake up, it's Vivek Strive is looking to buy $8 billion worth of Bitcoin, $75,000 in Bitcoin. I'm like, that would be a big buy. And we're waking up every day with bullish headlines. So I'm very excited the direction we're going. Rennick, thank you for joining us for the podcast, but I want to give an opportunity for anybody in our audience to learn more about you and specifically about Stratos.
Yeah, feel free to check out the website, stratos.xyz, or check out my Twitter it's just my name, Rennick Palley.
Great. I'm going to put all those links down below. Everyone, I highly encourage you to check it out. He's a wealth of knowledge talking about all the great stuff in crypto and Web3.